Hey, BookTube, it's my very late Pentathon week number 2 video where we follow Matt at Paperback Junkie and read some of his favorite authors, favorite books. It's the easiest read along there is, though double, triple the shame that it's taken me so long to get this video going. This week, week 2, which I'm doing smack in the middle of week 3, is Robert E. Howard. Last week was Lovecraft. This week it's Robert E. Howard, a fellow writer of his, a fellow pulp fiction writer of the 30s. Indeed, he never made it out of the 30s. And he is most famous for, of course, Conan the Barbarian. But he wrote a lot of other stuff as well. A lot of fighting stories, a lot of Solomon Kane, stuff like that. But I picked his Breckenridge Elkins stories, which are his sort of, they're the tall lion Texas tales, which really, it's sort of like the Hulk or Thor were a cowboy. Really that level of, this dude is just super strong. Oftentimes he gets silhouetted in if someone sees him behind in the darkness and a bit of moonlight, they think, "Crite, it's a grizzly bear," because that's how big he is. I will say off at the very front, this was written in the 1930s, and while Robert E. Howard wasn't that the level of he wasn't a racist as Lovecraft was. There's a couple of things in here that just I really slammed into, where he there's a particular Texan slang for what I believe is a slingshot, which uses the N-word. There's only that one instance, at least in I only read Gent From Bear Creek, which is just like first little hunk of this book. It was published in like 1937 as a novella in the UK, and yeah, it uses that shows up, and also it's a Western. So guess what? This is back when Westerns actually had Indians in them, and they're seen as the dreadful savages. Even though it's kind of interesting in this book, they only, at least in the novella, I'm gonna just talk about the novella because who knows what happens later on. I can't remember now, because I read the full novel a long time ago. The natives actually only show up very glancingly. I think one steals some of his clothes. There is a reference to a drunk Indian, which is that stereotype as well. But these are much more stories about the people of Humboldt, Nevada, and specifically the people of Bear Creek, who are these giants of men, and even the women are like, basically, killing grizzly bears for steaks and stuff like that. And they're all, it's sort of one of these things of, I almost get the sense of like kind of the Greek ages where, they talk about, the Greeks are always talking about, well, back in the old days, men could just rip trees up by their own stumps. And this is the whole thing kind of transplanted to Nevada, and also the Texas thing of, kind of Paul Bunyan, all those tales of Breckenridge Elton. So he's basically young Thor, but he's a cowboy. Now, probably the most other notable warning to give you this book is the voice. It's written in Breckenridge Elkin's voice. So it's very much kind of that, it's written with that kind of a vernacular thing, but it's done fairly lightly. Let me read you the first paragraph to give you a taste. If Joe Braxton hadn't drawed a knife whilst I was beating his head against a spruce log, I reckon he wouldn't have had that quarrel with Glory McGraw, and things might have turned out different to what they did. Pa always said Braxton's was a no-account folks, and I allowed he's right. First thing I'd knowed, Jim Garfield hollered, "Look out, Breck! That yeller hound's got a knife!" Then I felt a kind of sting and looked down and seen Joel had cut a big gash in my buckskin shirt and scratched my hide while trying to get at my innards. So it's very much that voice. I find that Robert E. Howard seems to be quite good at just sprinkling just enough in that you're not bogged down in, we're doing vernacular. I apologize for whatever imagined accent I was doing there. That's how I hear it in my head. And so this overpowered Thor-like character goes through all these kind of stories. The novella is basically, it's sort of stitched together stories, though it does have an overarching thing, all definitely all focused on Glory McGraw and how he's going to go off and show that Glory McGraw who spurned him and stuff like that. And in the end, maybe he learns a valuable lesson. But this is the good thing of like Breckenridge Elkins of these giant mountain men. He's the most giantest. He's the best fighter. He's the best shooter. He's nigh indestructible. However, he's not that smart, which I often thought of like Thor getting tricked by Loki all the time. There's no Loki character in this book, but Howard has that thing of poor Breck gets tricked and fooled, and often he's told to go find somebody, and he finds somebody who keeps on protesting, and it's like, I don't know what that, and just shut the hell up, you're coming with me. And it turns out, well, no, Breckenridge was completely mistaken, or his good nature as it is gets taken with him, or he just loses his temper and he does something stupid and gets the whole town up, whatever town, a chawed ear town up after him. So it's a very funny book that way. It's brutal violence, but it's brutal cartoon violence, and it's very much fun. I can see why in an era when westerns were king, these were actually the stories that were apparently the most commercially successful for him, not the Conan ones, which he became more famous for later. I mean, of course, the thing with the westerns is the westerns' main villain were Indians who became, Native Americans who maybe had an actual gripe and were thus not seen as actually good villains. It's sort of like when the Cold War ended, Russians for a while there became not the great villain to have, and you had to kind of manufacture other villains. But for something like the westerns, I think that cut out a main component of who's going to be the villain in your western if you can't vilify Native Americans who historically we've actually just we practice genocide on and shove them off their land, and we are the conquerors. How are we the underdogs in this kind of a story? But I read these when I was a kid. I read all of them, and I especially probably back then as a young teenager, these are just, I found they're hilarious. They're a little bit repetitive now. Reading them, it's like, okay, Breckenridge gets into a situation, he gets tricked, something happens, his amazing physical things. The great thing about it is Robert E. Howard is really good at writing action scenes, at writing, just visceral violence. And if you're into visceral violence, this is that kind of book. There's always a great set piece in each one. And indeed, the final brawl in this is just really, it's quite epic. And, the amount of damage that he does and the amount of damage that this guy can take and just sort of shrug off, it's truly got that kind of a tall tale. It's not if this is a fantasy, it's just a Western fantasy where you have Thor basically as the hero. He's not as Thor is, it's not that bright, which is great to have. You got to have, if he was also super smart as well, then there wouldn't be any story. But the fact that his weakness is he's kind of gullible. He gets taken in by stories. Oh, my wife, they're going to take away all my money, and my poor wife's not going to starving children. So you got to hold this gold for him at Breckenridge. It's like, yeah, he'll say, oh yeah, I'll do that for you. And I promise not to tell anyone, no matter what happens. That stuff lands him in trouble. So yeah, thank you, Matt. That was fun to kind of revisit Breckenridge Elkin, just like a little forgotten kind of little gem of Robert E. Howard's oeuvre, with the difficulties of the Western, of, just the time in there, but still, I found it a lot of fun. So yes, next week, I believe we'll have to go check. I believe it's doing something noirish, which I think I'll have to pick a short story because I'm also in the midst of Shake Tube. Oh, the pressures of the booktuber. Well, self-imposed, and I could walk away at any moment. I could just walk away, right? No, probably couldn't. All right, more videos later.